I'm thrilled to be here with the Honorable Soli Sorabjee, prominent Indian jurist and human rights advocate. Mr. Sorabjee served as Indian Attorney General from 1989 to 1990 and again from 1998 to 2004. He served as Vice President of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association and was appointed in 2000 as a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague for 6 years. Mr. Sorabjee is joining us today to deliver a talk, and welcome to Brandeis.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So I guess just first I would like to ask you what drew you to law in the first place?
Law. Well, the options were my maternal grandfather's business. I didn't like the ways of the business people. And then government service out of the question. Well, I suppose law, independence of the profession, and besides as a gift of the gab, and quite an argumentative chap. So I suppose that was the very sort of a practical choice which I took it. But by the way, there was no godfather for me in the profession. I had no one in the profession. But I was lucky to get into the chambers of a very illustrious, outstanding lawyer, also Jamshedji Kanga in Bombay. And that gave me a good start.
Great. I'm always interested in the law in post-colonial context because so much of the legal system, the laws itself, are inherited from colonialism. And some might say even the concept of the rule of law itself. Have you encountered this in your work as an Indian jurist? Have you encountered the conflicts between colonial law and Indian realities,
No,
for instance?
not really colonial law. We have certain laws which are general laws like law of partnership, sale of goods, contract. They have been now codified. They were common law principles. Now they have been codified into the statutes. And as far as principle of rule of law was concerned, that's from the beginning. Our courts were very keen to observe it and to enforce it. And that is because of a Privy Council judgment of Lord Atkin, one of the finest judges in my mind, who laid down the principle that any action prejudicial to a subject or to a citizen has to be backed by some legislative authority. In other words, mere executive order won't do. There is the law to back the action. And that the Indian courts inherited that tradition and they took it forward.
So the kind of moral imperative of the law in the context of a democracy.
Well, not only moral imperative, it's become a legal imperative because we consider the rule of law as an essential feature of our constitution.
Yeah. And what about indigenous or alternative to, I mean, are there other legal formations, Mughal, that have been handed down?
There are other personal laws of Muslims, of Christians, of Hindus. But if they are in conflict with any constitutional provisions, they have to give way. But that creates a problems as far as the Muslims are concerned. For example, polygamy and various cases where the women don't have the same rights of succession. So that is where the courts where I go very sort of tread, what I say so, with caution. They don't want to ruffle the feathers of the Muslim community and try and sort of harmonize them as far as possible with the current legal position.
Yeah, it was a very interesting compromise in the sense the Indian national legal system, which would somehow temper these demands for universal law with the needs of different communities.
Yes, you're right.
And it's an experiment that is experimental, so it hasn't completely succeeded, right? And
Uniform Civil Code is one of the objects of the principles of our Constitution, but it has succeeded with some communities, not quite Muslim communities, because unfortunately they take it as an interference in the religion. And there are orthodox sections, progressive sections. But I think it's a matter of time when these laws of marriage, succession, they have to really fall in with the general law of the land.
so you see that you believe, I mean, you see that the universalist premises of the law are important.
Yes, of course,
from your
of
perspective.
course.
And is that generally the perspective of the judiciary in India, in terms of people who are, you know, you were Attorney General and Is that a shared perspective among the kind of legal elite of India?
Well, it is, but there are also legal elites. You have conservatives, you have radicals, you have different kinds of elite. The elite is not composed of one people with one kind of thought or one kind of mentality. But the real lesson is that you must try and take the reform from within the community. Educate the people, make them see the necessity for reform, necessity for doing away with patently discriminatory provisions based on gender, for example. And then it's much easier to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. A conversation that hasn't been finished in legal studies, but in history and in literary studies as well. So something that's very interesting. I wanted to just change tack slightly. You mentioned the other day that you were influenced by Justice Brandeis when you were a younger lawyer, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, very much so. Actually, I wrote a book called The Law of Censorship in India. I wrote that book when the emergency was there. It was quite a rash thing to do. But I just, when I was told I was going to deliver a lecture, I realized that I quoted Brandeis 4 times more than any other judge.
Wow.
In different contexts. Because apart from his logic and the force of his reasoning, the felicity of language. I remember the expression, men feared witches and burnt women. That's a thing that sticks in your mind.
Yeah.
And of course, our Supreme Court has followed his dissenting judgments in many cases. We are not bound by Supreme Court judgments. We can either the majority or the minority, whichever appeals to the court. But Brandeis' judgment in the Olmsted, especially where his dissenting judgment has been quoted with approval by the Supreme Court of India. And as I mentioned, also the Supreme Court of Constitutional Court of South Africa. So you see his range, his sensitivity to civil liberty and how he has kept the balance. He did not get swayed away by the claims of the executive and the law enforcement authorities that we are facing an emergency, we've got to come down strongly on this. He said the end does not justify the means. And that's very striking because that was the article of faith with our father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. So you see how it really gels. And Brandeis, he was my favorite, of course. Holmes, Brandeis, Warren, and Brennan. But now after being in Brandeis University, I think Brandeis has gone up.
Okay, good. Excellent. What about cases that you fought? Is there, I mean, you must have been part of many, many cases. Is there one or a couple that stand out in your memory as significant, either significant for the larger Indian context or just personally exciting for you? Or?
No, even in the larger context. You see, our Supreme Court also is accepted the doctrine of rule of law. And a case happened, you won't believe it, but till 1967 there was no law regarding grant or refusal of passports. The whole thing was absolutely rested in the discretion of the passport authorities. So a stylish young lady went there and asked for a passport, maybe she had a better chance of getting it than a poor student who wanted to go there to work. Then I argued, that was the court, I argued, compared you have no law in a matter affecting a fundamental right to travel abroad. Without a passport, you can't effectively exercise the fundamental right. And if there is no law, if there is complete discretion, absolute discretion, then it violates the principle of rule of law. The court accepted that. The court accepted the position, and also the government accepted it. And next year, or rather, after a few months, they brought in an act called the Passport Act that lays down when a passport can be refused, can be revoked. But that was one case which is a feather in my cap, so to speak.
Yeah, the subject of your talk that you're about to give today at Brandeis is called The Rule of Law, a Moral Imperative for South Asia and the World. Is this kind of how you see yourself? I mean, is this your perspective? The kind of the institution, the establishment of the rule of law in these pockets in which it doesn't exist or it hasn't been established yet?
Well, it's not established, you have lawlessness. I think if you do not want executive lawlessness, if you do not want executive tyranny, I think rule of law is indispensable. And whenever rule of law has been flouted, you know what has happened. What happened? In the large parts of Europe, which were under the Nazi regime, my God, there was no one there. I mean, there was just a midnight knock. The people were gone away, taken away to concentration camps, and thereafter to worse gas chambers. And in experience has shown that where there is no rule of law, where law does not regulate the conduct of public officials and individuals, it's only arbitrary whim and caprice, then really tyranny begins. Then there is nothing. You have a state where the people are not governed by law, but by the fancy, by the caprice, by the whim of the official or the bureaucrat. Now, that's totally unacceptable in any civilized society. It's not a question of a legal, I think it's a moral imperative. You can't live in a society without rule of law, because you can't base your actions, your conduct, according to certain definite standards the law lays down. Otherwise you got to think, oh, what will peace police commissioner? Otherwise he'll not allow me to screen the movie. He won't allow me to run the restaurant. So that's why the necessity for law is very clear. Of course, the other question arises, what kind of law? Any law? The South Africa, the apartheid regime had a law which permitted blatant racial discrimination. You know, that people were, blacks were taken out of their homes and thrown away. So the other question arises, that law must have a certain core component, and that core component must be that it respects basic human rights. Because otherwise, a law, that can't be really speaking law in that sense. Mere existence of law is it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. The law must have a certain quality, as I said, a certain core component, and that the prerequisite is that law must respect individual human rights and individual human dignity. And really all these rights can only be enforced by what? By an independent judiciary. So these are requirements which make rule of law a living reality. Otherwise it becomes a symbol that you just talk about, the seminars and other things. But if it has to have any meaning, any content, these requirements have to be satisfied, because we can really speak of a society governed by the rule of law.
Is that how you would also talk about the emergency? I mean, the emergency was an interesting case in Indian history because, of course, there was a kind of consolidation of the rule of law in some sense, but it was without moral content. Is that how you would kind of interpret the emergency?
Yes, of course it was. No question about it. It was really, quite frankly, it was to protect Mrs. Indira Gandhi, because she thought she'd be swept away by the opposition, which had mounted a campaign after she lost the election in the Allahabad High Court. And thereafter, emergency was clamped down, and then some constitutional amendments was made, which said, notwithstanding the judgment of the Allahabad High Court, which had invalidated the election, the judgment shall be null and void, and the election shall be deemed to be valid. We can't believe it.
No, I think from the political perspective that's true, but she certainly had middle class support, partly because the trains ran on time and there were clean streets.
But that's what Mussolini also had, the middle class support in fascist Italy. This is sort of simplistic thinking. Trains are on time. There are no strikes. Labor is controlled.
Yeah.
What are you doing there?
Yeah.
I mean, trains may not run on time, but that doesn't mean you trample on the basic civil liberties of the people. Trains don't run on time. There are other ways and means of ensuring they run on time. But the interesting thing is, these constitutional amendments were challenged in the Supreme Court. And one of the judges called these clauses complete negation of the rule of law.
Interesting.
But she succeeded, because without relying on these constitutional amendments, she succeeded on merits. They said, no, there were not electoral malpractices, and the High Court has found. That's a different thing. Supreme Court can take a different view on facts. But not, my God, it was terrible. One couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
A constitutional amendment in India which says that notwithstanding anything was the judgment that said that judgment should be void and election should be valid. But that has happened during emergency, when democracy suffered a temporary demise in India. And thank God it was restored back in March 97,
18 months
1977,
later, right? Yeah.
when, of course, the successor government revoked it.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think that was a unique moment in Indian legal history? Do you think that kind of thing could happen again? Do you think
No.
India has moved away
No.
from, yeah.
Because I think the rulers have realized that the Indian people don't like this, don't relish its authoritarianism. They must be the middle-class people, sort of the club-going middle-class people, with a glass of wine in their hands to talk about how good it is, there are no labor strikes, and how nice it is, the trains are running on time. But this is very superficial thinking. And later on to realize, because the press was censored so badly, that Mrs. Gandhi didn't get the news she would have otherwise, and not gone in for an election. She was assured by her advisors that if she goes in for election, she'll come with a thumping victory. And mind you, she lost completely. I lost a bet. I took a bet to somebody. He said, Mrs. Gandhi, don't talk nonsense. $10. I was in college. Sanjay Gandhi won't come. Another $10. They were both wiped out. That was because they had a very, what shall I say, barbaric sterilization campaign, part of population control. They take out people from the trucks and compulsorily sterilize them, vasectomy. Now, I'm sure Mrs. Gandhi didn't know about it. She couldn't have approved of it. But because of press censorship, these things didn't come out. She didn't know. And that created such anger and hostility in the minds of the people, especially in the north. And that was one factor which very much went against her. The bad thing was the next government, but I was a law officer, we did not to touch family planning. Because it's very necessary in India. We go on multiplying like rabbits. But it had got such a reversion in the minds of the people, so we said, now go slow in family planning, because it evokes those ideas and incidents which had happened during this time. So press censorship, counterproductory, rebounded. If she had known about it, she would have certainly stopped it.
Yeah. So, as you know, we've begun this lecture series in your name, the Soli Sorabjee lecture series.
I'm very honored.
And well, it's an honor to have you here to participate in the lecture series. But one of the things we've tried to do is invite different speakers who think about justice, but we try to define justice very broadly. So not only in the legal sense of justice, but
You
also
come to a satisfactory definition of justice?
yeah. So I was going to ask you is how would you define justice if you had to broadly define it to include?
I'd have to go to a philosophy class and read all the books, justice, but basically it means fair dealing with the people, and the one element of justice is equal treatment to all the people, equality. I think that's the one main feature. You treat people on the basis of merit. You may have affirmative action programs, it's all right, but not this kind of a distinction on the basis of race, religion, and caste. That is something which really affronts one's sense of justice. And also, you must have independent courts to resolve disputes between citizen, and more important, citizen and the state. And then if the people feel that no, the courts are not independent, the so-called, as they call, sarkari courts, backed by government, then they're alienated, and then they have recourse to means which are not very pleasant, which are not very, one can say that they are really destructive of the very idea of the state based on rule of law. But so justice has various facets, various things, but it's what rankles is if you are unfairly treated. And if you are unfairly treated, particularly on the basis of your caste, the basis of your color, the basis of ethnicity, that's something that rankles. And that effort is always made to remove those causes as far as it's humanly possible.
Yeah, that's very, very true and very interesting perspective. So I guess I just have one final question. I wanted to ask you, you're a preeminent lawyer in justice and have, contributed in India and globally, but what are your other interests besides the law?
Other interests? If I had a chance, if Almighty God gave me the chance to be born again and come on this planet, I'd like to play clarinet like Benny Goodman. I'm not interested in attorney generalship, judgeship, because I used to play the clarinet.
Oh,
I knew
yeah?
Benny Goodman, a personal friend.
Really?
Yeah, he got a clarinet for me, 50% discount. I was taking a promise, Soli, you'll practice every day. Poor Benny, I couldn't do it. I really pray his forgiveness. But I would rather, and I'm the president of Capital Jazz. We arrange jazz festivals every year. We have bands from various countries. Unfortunately, we haven't had one from USA for about 2 years. But we have from Norway and even from Indonesia.
Nice.
Jazz, yes,
Yeah.
Indonesia.
Wow.
They have their own band of jazz. Then Australia and other countries, and that's my main interest. And I'm interested in literature, especially poetry.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you very much again. Welcome to Brandeis. It's very nice having you here.
Thank you. Nice talking to you, and nice being here.